My name is Randy Howell, and you're listening to the Faith and Fishing Podcast.
Welcome to the Faith and Fishing Podcast. I'm Cam.
And I'm Robert. In every episode, we're bringing you faith stories and fishing memories from some amazing members of the fishing community.
So join us as we shed a positive light on all things faith and fishing. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Faith and Fishing Podcast. I'm Cam.
Hey, and I'm Robert.
And we are going to be talking about some controversy in a tournament that has absolutely nothing to do with bass fishing. We have some responses to another podcast that we are friends with, and but before all of that, Robert, man, how are you doing?
Man, I'm doing good. Was under the weather for about the last week and a half, or week and a couple of days. Still have a little bit of a lingering cough, but feeling a lot better. So I'm glad that got over that. So, and I think I managed to get through that without getting anybody in my family sick, knock on wood. And so that was kind of my goal, is to
for sure
not pass that along to anybody in my family. So doing good on that front. Was sorry to miss the episode of the budget versus expensive gear, because I had some stuff on that, but we'll go down that road another time. And then last week I had to call last minute, and just because I was going to try to power through it, but then I was like, this is silly. It's not going to be a good podcast. It's not going to be any fun at all. So I had to pull out of that one, but did pretty good. And so what about you, man?
Yeah, I am doing well. Glad to have you back. Sorry about not having an episode last week. It was just whenever Robert couldn't make it, and I was like, well, I don't have a guest lined up. So I guess we should both apologize for dropping the ball.
That was totally on me.
On the guest,
just one of those
side
things.
But yeah, we will get back. We will get back into it. This time of year is always tough on me. Everybody seems to go through seasonal depression in the wintertime. Mine hits pretty hard last of June through the really hot months. And so even though the fishing's really good, it's kind of my time of year to shine when it comes to fishing. But speaking of fishing, was able to get out this past weekend a couple times and did pretty decent. I caught one big one on a crankbait, and everything else came on a Texas rig. And just throwing that out there, I can fish the plastics. Went out and actually ran into a buddy that I met on the lake, and I looked off in the distance. I was like, I bet that's him. And I texted him. I was like, hey, are you on this lake? He said, yep. He said, I know where you are. I'm in the next cove over. I'll come say hey. So he came around the corner and hooked a 3-pounder right in front of me. He was like, yeah, they're biting on the shaky head. It's the only thing I can get them to bite. I was like, well, I just cut a shaky head off because I got tired of pulling it and fighting the hydrilla with it. So
yeah, it's kind of crazy. Some people can throw something and be catching them, and the next person beside them can be throwing the same thing and not catching them. I don't know. Sometimes it's just crazy how, it's just the exact way somebody is maybe working a bait or lure, and then the next person is, just doesn't have that touch with that lure. I guess that's why we all have our different styles and different things we like. And, I definitely have my go-tos when nothing's working. And it's fun to do some other things and catch them on some top water sometimes, but there's some tried and trues for me that definitely I fall back on when nothing's seeming to work.
Oh, absolutely. And he tossed his 3 pounder back, and I caught one that was it was nowhere near 3 pounds, but it was a fish right after that. Um so yeah, it was a fun trip. Got to see a really pretty sunset, and then Sunday I went out again just for a couple hours right there at lunchtime, and I was like, it's only going to be a couple hours. I think I'll be okay in shorts. And my legs were burgundy after that, and work has been pretty miserable the past couple of days, but finally starting to feel a little bit better. So it won't be long before it starts, the where it's almost to the point of peeling, so the sweat starts to like create these bubbles, and you gotta you gotta get the
Nice.
sweat out from underneath your skin. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's some of the easiest times to get burned, either when it's cloudy and you don't think the sun's going to affect you, or I'm only going for a couple hours, and I've done the same thing. So,
Absolutely, and a
yeah,
couple hours in the middle of June at noon,
it's all
that's
it
a
takes.
lot of sunshine, and on the lake, there's not a lot of shade, so that was, uh that was something, that was something I would prefer not to repeat, and it's just one of those things that it's the thing about this time of year, you gotta wear long pants and long sleeves and gloves and a hood and hat and all this stuff to try to protect yourself. So you're sitting there basically in a sauna with all these clothes on, and as comfortable as Carolina water shirts can be, they don't make pants. So I'm sitting there just, you know, and I will say this, Saturday I went out, and about 10 minutes into paddling, I was like, man, I don't remember the last time I was this uncomfortable on a kayak. And I realized whenever I hurt my back, I took my kayak cushions off to sit on them during the
Uh,
podcast, and I never put them back on.
that'll
And
do it.
the that extra little inch or so that it gives you sitting up makes a huge difference. The comfort makes a huge difference. I couldn't reach the rod in my far back rod holder. I couldn't get close enough, and it's just because I didn't have that extra inch or so
Yeah.
to be able to turn around and get over the back of my seat. So it's crazy how much of a difference those little things can make.
Yeah, definitely. And it's just some things you don't even think about. And, it could be a kayak cushion, or, even, uh, I did get to take the kayak out on Sunday, and I used the crate that I got from you, and even where the rod holders are placed in it, and just the angle of it, I was like, huh. And it's nothing that I won't get used to. Um, but the rods were harder to get to than in my other one. I don't know if they're sitting lower or higher, but the tackle boxes were so much easier to get to because it's slanted, and so I really like that, the fact that the tackle boxes are a ton easier to get to in that crate than the one I was using. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, and I was thinking about filming myself and everything, but I didn't think about charging my battery, so I was, without a fish finder and without my camera, and which, I mean, that's fine. That's less things to take with me, less things to worry about. And I mean, I was on a lake that I'm very familiar with, so I was able to. The only thing I needed to know was how deep the hydrilla, like the top of the hydrilla was, and I was able to figure that out by throwing a DT8. Did it hit it? Yes. Throw a DT6. Did it hit it? No. Well, it's between 6 and 8 feet.
There
So,
you go.
so yeah, we got it figured out. But let's let's go ahead, thank a couple sponsors, and then we are going to dive into something that we don't typically talk about a lot on this podcast, and that is saltwater tournaments. So let's dive into it.
Get Outdoors Pedal and Paddle is one of the largest canoe, kayak, and cycling retailers in the Southeast, with a huge selection of kayaks, canoes, bikes, and all the accessories needed to experience paddling and cycling comfortably and safely. Get Outdoors helps to expand and educate the paddling community through their free demos held on local lakes in the Greensboro, North Carolina area, and through in-store clinics and on-the-water courses and demos. And we'll even get your new boat rigged up for kayak fishing for you. Stop by the shop in Greensboro, North Carolina, or check out shopgetoutdoors.com to be wowed by their selection.
If finesse fishing is your comfort zone, something you want to learn better this year, or just something you like to tie on as a Hail Mary pass, Jade's Jigs has everything you need and more, and it's all eco-friendly and lead-free. With an awesome selection of baits and colors, they've got a variety of techniques covered for you. Finesse jigs, underspins, Nico weights, Ned rigs, and more are all waiting for you at jadesjigs.com. And while you're there, use promo code FNF10 for 10% off your purchase. That's jadesjigs.com and promo code FNF10 for 10% off. All right, so here in North Carolina at the coast, there is a big saltwater marlin tournament that takes place every year called the Big Rock. And I have my issues with the Big Rock. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna hold back. I have my issues on how the things are worded and how things are run. But this year it ended in controversy. So Robert, do you know the details behind that?
Yeah, so going into the last day, a boat with the name Sushi was in the lead with a high 400s, maybe around 490, something like that, marlin. And the Sensation had hooked a fish, was coming in late on the last day of the tournament, and got the fish up, finally got to the scales and weighed the fish. The fish was somewhere in the high 600s, maybe 680, something like that. So definitely a much, or maybe low 600s. Anyway, 600 and something, but you go from 490 to the 600s, it was at least 100 and something pounds heavier than the second place fish. But unfortunately, the Sensations blue marlin had 2 shark bites, and according to the rules, which most all of the offshore big fish tournaments go by, if you reel a fish in and it has been bitten or damaged by another fish, then it is disqualified. The best I can tell the reasoning behind that is, once that shark attacks the blue marlin, it can cripple that fish where it's easier to reel in, causing it not to be as much of a challenge as fishes that have not been bitten by a shark or predator. So that's the reason the rule is in place. It's not a rule that is made up by the Big Rock. It is an offshore fishing federation rule. I'm not sure of the exact abbreviation of whatever that is.
It's the IGFA, the International Game Fish Association, the same one that does the world records and everything.
There you go.
So this fish would have been disqualified from a world record if it had been big enough to be that as well. I do have issues with that rule. Not necessarily that I don't have issues with the rule itself. I have issues with the double standard, because if the fish ends up with lacerations from your leader getting wrapped up in your leader, that's okay. And in my opinion, that should be more of a penalty because you hurt that fish. But I mean, I guess these are fish that are coming in. They're not gonna go back in the water, which marlin does not taste good anyway. I don't. It's a sport fish, and like it is. Why are you keeping this fish that is in decline, and it doesn't taste good to begin with? I don't know, but anyways, um, excuse me. Um, my thing is, what if your reason is the actual reason that this rule is in place? I don't know if you've ever fished and like caught a catfish and it rolled and got wrapped up in the line. It sure makes it a lot easier to fight too. I mean, so I think I don't disagree that this rule should be in place or should be enforced. I just think that if somebody ends up with a lacerated fish from their leader line, that one should be disqualified too.
Yeah, I think and I've only heard bits and pieces of this the last couple of days. I guess the winning fish from 2019 also had a shark bite, and it was not disqualified. I don't know. I haven't seen pictures of that fish from 2019. I did try to pull those up on the internet, but I didn't spend a lot of time on it, and so I don't know if it was a different circumstance. To me, where those bites were on the sensations fish, to me, I don't think it would have affected. I don't think it would have affected the fish and its ability to fight. However, I do know several people that were at the weigh-in, and several people that fish. Actually, the boat that I usually fish on was fishing on Sunday, which the tournament was already over, and fishing the grass line that the sensation was fishing on the same grass line. And the guy that I normally fish with had some conversation. And I think that blue marlin that got disqualified, I think it had died a long time before they ever got it to the boat. And that's what took them so long to reel it in, because they were reeling in just dead weight. And I'm thinking that's the reason that it got attacked by sharks as well, is because it, couldn't swim to avoid them. But I mean, obviously, if you're hooked to a line, that's going to inhibit your ability to get away from a predator. But also, if that fish is not alive anymore, it has a lot more chance of getting attacked by a shark. I don't know the reasons that it would have died before they got it up. But if you have something that's 600 something pounds of dead weight and you're trying to reel it up, it's a lot more difficult to get that fish in than one that's even fighting you. So, there's a lot to that story. I hate it for the people that were fishing that. I hate it that it happened. But it's black and white in the rules. Is that something that maybe they should revisit? Yes, no. I don't really know enough about it other than to say it makes me sick to my stomach for them to have reeled in a fish that big. And you're not talking about like our normal payout for the Hobie BOS or a local tournament. A local tournament's and $1,000, $1,500. A Hobie event's $10,000. You're talking about close to $3 million. Yeah. And that's a substantial amount of money to lose on a technicality. So I just hate it that it happened. I hate the situation. I wouldn't want to be in either position. I wouldn't want to be the angler or the boat captain or anybody on the boat, and I wouldn't want to be the tournament officials having to make that call. it's just a bad
Yeah.
situation all the way around. And honestly, I wouldn't want to be the sushi captain either. I mean, because that dude has got to be sick to his stomach as well to know that now he's in a position where he didn't have the biggest fish, but the other boat lost on a rule like that. So I feel for those guys too, because I think they're getting a lot of flack for something that they had no control over whatsoever.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And that's one of the hard things about this disqualification in general is it sounds like, if a shark bites your fish, you don't really have control over that either. So it's one of those things. It's like you lose $3 million because of something you couldn't control. That's a hard pill to swallow. And I mean, I do think that the owner of the boat did, he filed his appeal, and he's awaiting the results of that. I don't know if that was actually if those results have already come back or not. But
I haven't heard that either. I know they have 5 days. They're supposed to come back with a decision within 5 days, and when that was appealed, and we're recording this on a Wednesday, I think that was probably filed either Sunday or Monday. So it's either been 3 or 4 days. So maybe tomorrow you'll hear some. I don't expect it to change. The one thing that I think would be cool, but I have no idea. I know there's some pretty big sponsors involved in the Big Rock. It would be pretty cool to get that sensation fish some type of payout from somewhere. But I don't know if that'll happen either. That's a lot to ask of a sponsor to say, hey, step up. And I'm not sure how profitable, the Big Rock tournament is in general. Like if they have a pool of funds to do that. And then if you do that, does that set a bad precedent moving forward as well? But, I don't know. Like I said, I don't want to be in any of those positions, any of those shoes.
Yeah.
So that's just a tough deal all the way around.
I went back and looked at the 2019 fish, 914 pounds, which just blows my mind. But looking at it, it had some like lacerations on its face. So this is just pure speculation from 5 minutes worth of looking at pictures while you were talking. If it were me, my reasoning for allowing that fish to win and not the other is it's got some lacerations on its face. It could be from leader line. It could be from a boat prop. It could be from a shark. It could be from any number of things. The 680-pound fish from this tournament is very clearly a bite on its tail, and then another one on its flank. It got bit by something.
Both of those bites are clearly shark bites. I mean, there's no doubt about it. That's what I'm saying. I just don't think there's any way for them to overturn it. And I'm not sure, you get into these tournaments and you get into all this money and you get into the legalities of it. I mean, in a court of law, which is what it would come down to if they flipped it over. If I was the captain of the sushi, I'd be like, oh, wait a second. It says right here in black and white in the rules. And so there's no way they can reverse that. I mean, it just kind of is going to be is what it is. And I feel bad for everybody involved, but I'm not sure if that is something that needs to be revisited. I mean, do you make it a judgment call? If you think the shark bite didn't affect the fish, you can allow it. And then you get into a whole lot of gray area, which we're about to talk about. The gray area coming up in our next subject that we're going to come across after the Big Rock. But I don't know. I know that everybody on the coast of North Carolina and everybody at the Big Rock weigh-in wants the sensation to win. They're local to Atlantic Beach. That whole boat, and the captain and everybody are great guys. A lot of people down there know them. A lot of people were pulling for them, and there's just such a huge difference in the size of that fish and then the sushi's fish. I think that's the other thing, looking at those two fish side by side. I mean, that's what people want to see, are those huge, the huge 700, 600 pound fish, or the 900-pound fish from 2019. And, there's just a lot of people pulling for them. And I know when they, first said that it was not going to, that it was under review when they weighed it in, that happened late Saturday night, I believe. By the time they finally got the fish in, they got to the scales. It was pretty late. There had been a lot of adult beverages consumed by then by everybody that was in Morehead City. And I saw a few videos where it was, I won't say a riot atmosphere, but not far from it, when they said that fish was under review and was probably going to be disqualified because of the shark bites. So, unfortunate situation.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, you kind of gave us a good segue there with the gray area. So we are going to thank a couple sponsors, and then we will leave this kind of black and white topic and jump into the gray. Mr. B Lure Company is making high quality handcrafted lures and has been for 30 years right here in the U.S. Using all metal components, owner and gamakatsu hooks, and silicone or frog hair skirts, Mr. B is pumping out some awesome spinner baits, jigs, buzz baits, underspins, and more, including some of the most unique bladed jigs on the market. To fill up your tackle box, go to MrBLureCompany.com, that's MRBLureCompany.com, and use promo code faithnfishn 1x10 at checkout to save 10% on your first order. That's faith the letter N, fish the letter N, POD, so Faith and Fishing Pod, just like our Instagram handle, 1x10.
A huge selection and crazy fast shipping is already enough to turn heads as an online tackle shop, but Omnia Fishing sets themselves apart with their ambassador program. With Omnia, you can send in fishing reports for your local lakes that recommend baits, structure, tactics, and gear. And when another angler takes your advice and purchases something from your report, you get credit for it to spend at Omnia. The best part means that with Omnia Fishing, you can shop by lake and purchase baits and gear that are proven to work where you're fishing. To get started, go to omniafishing.com and use promo code FNF15 to save 15% on your first order.
All right, so a couple of weeks ago, Dan Perry and Armando Salah from the Bass Kayak and Beers Podcast Network on the Advanced Kayak Angler had a debate, and it was called Is Kayak Fishing Dead? And so Dan was very much arguing in favor of the paddler and saying that the national trails are starting to squeeze out the paddler as the little guy. And and Armando was arguing that that this is where the sport is going. So this is the majority. This is how basically how it should be. And I mean, let's start by saying we love both of these guys, and we will continue to listen to their podcasts because they're fantastic. And Armando, because I disagree with you, doesn't mean I think any less of you. But Armando, I disagree with you. So So, in my opinion, I'm gonna start out this one with my opinion. I think that I have learned that I am much more of a purist than I want to admit. I think that kayak fishing is all but dead. There are very few people out there now that that are kayak fishermen, and there are a lot of fishermen that fish from a kayak, but there are few kayak fishermen left. And I'm going to get on my high horse here, and I am going to say that that we are at the point now where like a Johnny boat or what's the plastic John boat from Bass Pro Shops, like Bass, is it Bass Tracker? Is that what they're called? There's something like
Um,
that.
yeah, I'll think about it in a second. I know what you're talking about.
Those need to be allowed in our tournaments because you cannot tell me that a Old Town Autopilot 13.5 is a kayak. It's a plastic boat that was built around a motor. It was never meant to be man powered. That is not that's not a kayak to me. Um, I still have trouble calling a pedal kayak a kayak sometimes. But if you've got a 13.5 foot boat with at least one motor on it and two graphs and all this stuff, you've kind of left what kayak fishing is, and now you are fishing from a kayak. It's a phenomenal fishing platform. Don't get me wrong, it is a phenomenal fishing platform, and I know that I am going to get some flack back on this because I have some good friends that are fishing from boats that I struggle calling a kayak like a 13.5 foot Titan with a motor on the back and a motor on the front and two graphs, and that to me that is that that is not a kayak. It is marketed as a kayak because if it is not marketed as a kayak, they can't fish it in kayak tournaments. But if those guys are allowed, and if an autopilot is allowed, it's time to start allowing the plastic John boats as well, because that's what these things are. And if it was never meant to be man powered, you're not fishing in a kayak. Um, but I'll get back off of my high horse because we have to talk about uh, the other part of this as well. But I want to get your thoughts, Robert, as someone who fishes out of a kayak with a motor on it that is a much bigger kayak than what I have.
Yeah. So I have a bona fide SS 127, and I've got a bona fide P 127. I used to only have the SS 127 because, well, let's go back. Let's rewind for a second. So I always fished out of a bass boat. So growing up, my dad had a bass boat. It was not a bass boat. It was not a high dollar bass boat. It was a tri-hull bass boat from the probably early 70s. There's some Polaroids of me when I was 1, and I'm almost 50 now. So there's some Polaroids of me standing beside that boat or sitting up on the boat after my dad had gone fishing. We had that boat and fished out of it until I was a teenager. And then even after that, he bought a neighbor's used boat that he fished out of. And when I say fished out of, he may have been lucky enough to go 3 or 4 times a year. So it was not a every weekend type thing. And then when I got older, I had a John boat that we duck hunted out of and fished out of, 14-foot aluminum boat. And I put a deck on it like a bass boat, put a seat on the front of it, had a seat in the back of it for the kids. And we would go catch bluegill with the kids, and I'd take it out by myself and treat it as a bass boat. It had a trolling motor on the front of it. And then I did buy an older Ranger boat, fished out of that Ranger boat. And for duck hunting, we used Ascend H12s, and I had 2 Ascend H12s and an Ascend H10. If you're not familiar with those kayaks, they're basically a kayak / canoe hybrid. So they're open in the inside like a canoe. It's a sit-in kayak, and it does have the covers that go on the front and the back to help keep some of the water out if you get into some chop. I got lazy one day, didn't want to take the boat out, and threw one of my duck hunting kayaks in the back of the truck because I wanted to go fish, but I was too lazy to go put my bass boat in. So I started fishing from that H12. Well, about after the second or third fish, I was ready to sell the bass boat because there's something about sitting that close to the water. And I like catching fish out of kayaks more than I liked catching fish out of the bass boat. So I sold the bass boat, kept the Ascends, and I started looking on Facebook Marketplace for, well, I kept the Ascends for a while, and I started fishing tournaments out of the Ascends. The first CCKF tournaments I fished, I was in that Ascend 12. And I made it about halfway through the year and decided that my back couldn't take a sit-in kayak anymore. Started looking for a sit-on-top kayak, ran across a good deal on this Bonafide SS 127 that I still have. Got it for a great deal off Facebook Marketplace. Kept it, and I was fine paddling. I didn't mind paddling that kayak, but decided I wanted to do some bigger tournaments. First one I did was the Hobie BOS on Toledo Bend, and I fished that tournament, and I was very, very limited compared to the other anglers on where I could fish because I was paddling, and they all had pedal kayaks, not even motors. They had pedal kayaks because the Hobie, you couldn't have motors. But I could not go, and I could not sit on a spot because I didn't have a motor and I had to paddle. I couldn't go long distances because you just can't go as far paddling as you can pedaling. I got back from that tournament. I went and bought this P127 so I could pedal and fish those tournaments, and now I have motors for both of them. I have a motor for the front of each one of them with a mount, and then I've got a NK180 for the back of the P127. So having said all that, I like the motors. I like all the electronics. I like the forward-facing sonar. I don't have that on any of the kayaks. I did have it on the Ranger bass boat that I had. However, even though I liked all that stuff, I still think that if you're going to be a kayak fishing trail, I think you have to make sure that you are making rules that include and even encourage people sometimes to paddle, because that's where this sport came from, was people paddling the kayaks. And now really to compete, it's like you said, it's a mini bass boat, and that's exactly what it is. You've got guys that are running PA-14s with 2 or 3 screens on them with you got a Humminbird hanging off of one side with the 360 on it. You've got a Garmin on the other side with live scope on it, and then you have a regular graph that most people have with your side sonar, down scan, however you have that your screen set up on that. And then you have motors on the front, motors on the back, and it's a mini bass boat. I don't see anything wrong with that side of it either, but for tournament organizations to make rules that further handicap people that want to paddle, I think is a disservice to the sport. And what I mean by that is you're if you choose to paddle, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. There's no doubt about it. You are at a disadvantage because you cannot go as far as you can with pedals or a motor. So your one thing that you have is you can get into places where those kayaks cannot get. You can't take a PA 14 where a bona fide river can go. You can take a Crescent ultralight in places that my bona fide won't go with the trolling motor on the front of it. So when you start handicapping those places, then you start handicapping those people that love to paddle. Now, do I think you ought to be able to fish 30 miles up a creek? That is, if you're fishing, because take Kentucky Lake and Barkley Lake. Kentucky Lake and Barkley Lake, you've got people fishing 40 miles of the Tennessee and the Cumberland River that feed those two lakes. If your tournament is on Kentucky Lake and Barkley Lake, which if you guys don't know that, those lakes are side by side. Most tournaments on Kentucky Lake include Barkley Lake because a lot of people treat it as one body of water, even though it's two. But if that's where your tournament is, you can't fish the Red River, which is 40 miles from Lake Barkley and Kentucky Lake, but it feeds into that. And I know for a fact that there were people fishing it for KBF that was there a few years back. There were people fishing because that's where I grew up. I know people were fishing it because I could tell in their videos. I know exactly the rivers and the creeks that they were in. So I think there's got to be a happy medium. And they came up with the fact that they want to go with these designated ramps. I don't think that's the best solution for it. I do think they had to do something where you would be fishing the same body of water. I agree with that. You shouldn't be able to fish so far away.
I agree with that too.
Yeah.
But I will say, as someone who doesn't need or want to use a trailer for my kayak, I hate using a boat ramp. It is so difficult for my kayak cart getting it loaded back up. It's not so bad getting it launched, but getting it loaded back up on that thing is so frustrating and so difficult because it always wants to roll back to you while you're trying to get it latched on and everything. And I mean, so here is the way that it came across to me as a paddler. Now I don't have much interest in fishing national trails and stuff, so it wasn't like a huge slap in the face to me or anything, but this is how it came across, being where I am. So, um, we, in our tournament trail, we have Hank Vajon, who has, especially at the beginning of this year, just absolutely killed it from his paddle kayak. And I heard multiple times from multiple people, not knowing that I am a paddler, says, "Man, it's bad when you get beat by a guy in a paddle kayak." And I had to bite my tongue so bad because I'm the chaplain of the tournament trail. I didn't need to turn around and snap at the guy. This is how it came across to me. In Bass last year, Drew Gregory was AOI. Whooped up on some people in that shoalie and went to places where these other guys could not go. And so I know that this is not the case for everybody, but like I said, this is just how it came across from the outside looking in. All these people who spent $10,000 to $20,000 rigging out their kayak felt entitled to be able to beat someone in a cheap kayak, and they could not do it. And so They complained and they complained and they complained, and got a rule changed to make sure that it didn't happen again. That is how it came across to me.
Yeah, and I can see how that would come across that way, and you know, I think that thought crossed my mind as well. However, Drew probably spends as much money on all of his stuff or more than somebody with a $15,000 kayak, because I've stayed
He
with
just
Drew.
happens to do it on 4 different
Well,
kayaks instead of
right,
one.
exactly. I've stayed with Drew before, and Drew's not opposed to running motors. He'll have a motor with him, and he may use it in pre-fishing if that trail allows it. He'll use a motor when he needs to use a motor for pre-fishing, and then he figures out what his best game plan is. But I roll up to the house, and I've got a trailer, and my kayak's trailered, and I roll up to the house and park my trailer, and I look over, and there's like a 6-tier trailer sitting under the covered part, and I'm like, what the heck is all that? And then go inside, and dude's like, oh yeah, well, I always carry 4 or 5 kayaks. I mean, I may need this one to go in this place. I may need this one to go here. I may need this one to go here. And I may need my big kayak with a motor because I want to do all these other things. And then once I go through all my progression on everything and all the map study that I've done up to this, then I decide what's my best option going to be. So I get what you're saying with that. But my thing is those people can't get to the spots he gets to. And Drew Gregory and people that fish these national trails, they all work super hard. They all put in a ton of time, and time is something I want to hit on after we talk about this, because I think that's another major factor in these tournaments. But they all put in a ton of time. They all put in a ton of work. But Drew finds fish that are dumber than the fish that I find, because I don't have the time or the effort to go to these places that he's going to find these dumb fish. And when I say dumb fish, it's just like I was saying before we got on the air. The last couple of days, I've probably caught 30 bass out of a pond close to where I work because nobody fishes it. Nobody fishes it. It's been cloudy and overcast. And I'm like, you know what? I guarantee I can go over there and wear them out. And it was probably every other cast. But when you go back into these places that nobody has fished or very infrequently fishes, you're going to catch a lot more fish. Hence the reason that those people do well. Hank Bajan, Jordan Marshall, Russ Snyder, Drew. That's the reason they go fish these places, is because you can catch more fish than whether or not I'm going to a point or something that I think I've found on a map and I think it's good. And you know what? It probably is good. But if I found it, 50 other tournament anglers have found that same spot and they fished it. But these other spots that some of these guys are going to are not. And I hate to see that side of it gone because because you have to put in at a ramp, and like I said, I'm not talking about a spot that's 40 miles from the lake. But I do think if you had boundaries that were, I don't know, I don't even know what the right distance is from the actual body, a mile up a creek arm. I don't know. Is that too far? I don't know. I have no idea what's too far or too short. But I do think it needs to be boundaries. And we had talked about this before with something else. With the technology today, that you should be able to pull it up on a GPS and have those maps outlined and make sure that you're where you're supposed to be. Because I know that's one thing that Armando brought up was, well, everything's not going to be at a bridge. Well, you know what? You should be able to pull up and see, because whether or not I have cell service or not, my GPS always works. And I'm not even sure why that is, because I'm not that smart to figure that out. And it looks like if my GPS would work and it'll tell me where I was at, that I could make a damn phone call or enter a fish too. But I know that's two different things. But my GPS always works. My dot always moves where I'm supposed to move, or when I'm moving. But so I guess I'm agreeing with you, but disagree maybe on the reasoning. I think those people don't want to work as hard as Drew, and they don't want him to have an advantage. And not to say they don't work as hard, they work hard in different ways. They work hard with their electronics. They're more of a boat tournament fisherman than a kayak fisherman. And I don't know the right or the wrong answer. I think you need to make space for both of those. I think in anything you do, you want to cast a wide enough net to capture everybody you can capture. Because if I'm in business, I want to capture everybody I can capture with my product. So I want to capture these people that can only paddle. I want them to have a chance to win a tournament. And I want these people that are coming from bass boats, because we're getting more and more of those, because it's very easy to transfer from a bass boat to a PA-14 with 2 graphs, and you can stand up and fish. It's like you're on a bass boat. I mean, it really is. So, I think you want to capture both of them. And I think limiting it to designated ramps does not play in the favor of the paddler. But I also don't want them fishing 30 miles up a creek arm or a river either,
Right.
because I don't think that is where the tournament should be. If it's on a lake, then it should be significantly less than 30 miles.
Yeah, I definitely agree there that you need to be fishing, even if it's a creek arm or something that's close to it needs to be, arguably part of the body of water. And the boat I was trying to think of is a bass raider.
Bass raider, yeah.
That's the one I was trying to think of.
I was going to say bass hound. That's the name that kept coming to my mind. But there's probably different names. Bass raider is, I know what you're talking about, with like the 2 pontoons and the seats that go in the slides. And you're supposed to be able to fit 2 dudes on it. But if they're my size, you're only fitting 1. I'm telling you. That choker will turn over. Don't ask me how I know.
Yeah. All right. So there was something else that you wanted to touch on with this.
Yeah. So I think that the top anglers, no matter which avenue they choose, whether they choose the PA-14 and they have the electronics, the live scope, all that deal, or they choose to paddle and not have any electronics, I think the top anglers are going to whip most people's asses, excuse my language, every day of the week. And when I say the top anglers, let's just take the top 20 in the national trails. And I venture to say that most of the top 20, most of them predominantly fish or have a job in the fishing industry. And by fishing industry, meaning they're either writing about fishing, podcast, guiding on their days where they're not doing tournament fishing. They have the flexibility to go to these places a week early and put in the time that it takes to do well in these tournaments. So I don't think the deciding factor on whether somebody's going to do well is if you're going to paddle and put your boat in where somebody else can't get to, or if you're going to run live scope and somebody else isn't. I think there's a lot of back and forth about why people are good. Well, they're good because they've had more time on the water than the next guy that can't beat them. And that's just it. Now, when you put those 20 people all together, and all 20 of those people have had more time on the water then let's just say it's capped out at 200. Those top 20 people have had more time on the water than the next 180 people. And obviously it's stair step down. I'd say the next 40 probably have significant time on the water too. But you get down past that, and you're talking about most of your weekend people like me who's like, oh, I just want to see what I can do against these people.
People
Well,
who didn't have enough PTO to get there more than a day ahead of time.
That's right. I'm going to tell you what you're going to do. You're going to get your butt kicked is what you're going to do. Because if you don't have the time or you haven't put the time in, then there's just no other way around it. I don't care. You can go with you can go with 360, you can go with live scope, you can go with a damn XI3 on the front and a NK180 or a Torpedo on the back. And Christine Fisher could show up with no electronics, no nothing, with a paddle, and my money's on her every time because she's got more time on the water than most anybody else. Or, there's people in that group, those 20 people, just using her as an example, those 20 people have more time on the water, and they've forgotten more about bass fishing than most kayak fishermen know. Most kayak anglers know. So I think we get hung up a lot of times on the, some of the smaller, bigger stuff. We think it's big stuff, but to me, it's really smaller stuff. It's really just the time on the water. And most of those people, I do not care. You could put them in whatever. It's still going to be those same 20 people are still going to be at the top. Now, are you going to have 10 of those 20 are going to be in the top 20? Then you have some local people that know some spots that are going to sneak in there. Somebody like me might have a great day just because I got lucky and happened upon a spot, and I might have a day, but that's 1 in 100, that I might have. And then the other 99 times I'm in the bottom fourth of the tournament. You know what I'm saying? So, overall, to me, it is the time that people have to put into the sport, the overall time that you fished, and even for an hour on my lunch break every day, I go over there and I throw stuff at these stupid bass that are in this pond. I'm still learning something, because I'll pick up just a little something every time I go over there. And that's why I go over there. I eat my ham and cheese sandwich, and I throw some different baits around, and I know what I can catch them on. And now I started messing with other baits and seeing if I can make them bite it, because I know I can catch them on certain things. But now I'm trying to change things around and just see what I can make them bite and see how I'm working this lure or that lure. And these are things that those top 20 kayak anglers, and you can take it to the elites, you can take it to the MLF. Anybody that's at that level has so much time on the water and is so far ahead of the weekend warrior anglers that it doesn't matter what your weekend guy buys, does, what kayak he has. It doesn't matter where he puts in. Because you take a weekend guy that's going to put in, you can put in 30 miles up a creek arm. You might get lucky every once in a while, but you ain't finding the stuff that Drew Gregory's finding. You're just not. He's fished rivers his whole life. He has a system. He goes through it. He does his map study. He gets these 6 to 8 spots. He goes around and checks them. A lot of the time, not even casting. He can probably go in there and look and say, nah, probably nothing in that, and go to the next spot. And then when he finds something that looks good, he's going to throw in there a couple of times. If it looks really good, he may drag his kayak in there, check it out. He's got a system down. So it doesn't matter if I go in and I buy a Crescent Ultralight and I go into the skinniest of water. That doesn't mean that I'm going to compete in that tournament. I can waste my time in skinny water the same as I can waste my time in the lake with looking at damn live scope. To me, both of them would be a waste of time against those people that have way more time on their lifetime, and they also have way more time because they got there on a Tuesday or a Monday for a Saturday, Sunday tournament, and I'm showing up trying to get there in time Friday to at least get a half a day. So I'm not knocking any of them. That's just that they have made sacrifices to be able to do those things. And then, our life's paths do not always go down the same road as somebody else. And you can want and covet those things all you want. But I'll be honest with you, I'll take my 3 kids and watching ball games and chasing them around, taking them to practice any day from going and fishing 5 days before a tournament. You got to be crazy if you think that I would rather go 5 days and fish for a tournament so I could compete in that rather than to go watch my kids and live the life that I lead. Now, I do like to go every once in a while and just see if I can get that 1 in 100 and get lucky and find a spot. But it's just different. People's lives are different. And you know what? I think that what people need to understand is that's okay. It's okay that I just want to be this weekend dude that I want to see if I can get lucky every once in a while and creep up on a spot. But it doesn't mean that I need to go blow all this money on live scope and a $20,000 kayak because I want to compete in this tournament. Because for most of us, competing in that tournament, and even if you place or win, that doesn't make you who you are.
Absolutely. And a lot of it comes down, even if it's not necessarily I feel entitled to be able to beat him, it's I feel entitled to not have to do the same amount of work.
Yes.
I mean, there's a sense of entitlement somewhere that is leading to a lot of this, in my opinion. But I think you hit the nail on the head with a lot of what you said, for sure. And I mean, if you really, really want to, do some of these things, whether it's make it in the professional kayak fishing, be a PKA, as they say, or whether you want to be a professional YouTuber, or whether it's you want to be a professional athlete or a professional touring musician or something like that, what it really boils down to, and the reason that I am not that, is you have to work harder than everybody else. You don't have to be better than everybody else, but you have to work harder than everybody else. And that is the reason that I did not make it as a basketball player, as a bassist, as a YouTuber, as a professional angler. These were all aspirations that I had at one point. Like whenever I was 13 years old and 5'10", and was being told that I was probably going to be somewhere around 6'7", I knew for a fact I was going to be in the NBA.
Yeah.
And you know what? A lot of the reason that I'm not, I probably is, biological. If I ended up being 6'7", I probably would have worked a lot harder. But yeah, I mean, what it boils down to is you got to work harder. And this isn't exactly the conversation I was expecting to have, but it's a good one. But yeah, so let's thank a couple of sponsors. And unless you've got something else to add, we'll go ahead and close it out.
Yeah, no, I'm good with that.
All right. Let's see if I can remember which sponsors we haven't thanked yet. If a fly rod is your weapon of choice, check out Atollas. Their Fly Caddy is the most convenient way to get your favorite flies to the water, or just keep them handy by clipping it to your hat, truck visor, backpack, rod case, or just whatever. You can also bundle it up with flies from independent fly tires that Atollas has teamed up with through their Fly Light project. Choose from bundles specializing in redfish, carp, saltwater, or freshwater. Head over to atollas.co, that's ATOLLAS.co, to get your fly caddy today and use promo code faithnfish15 to save 15% on your order. That's faith the letter N, fish the number 15 at checkout for 15% off. Few things ruin your day on the water as bad as losing gear. But with the retrieval devices for fishing rods, action cams, bow fishing bows, and more from Save Your Outdoors, you don't have to let dropping your stuff ruin your day because you can get it back. The pressure-sensitive filter keeps water from rain and quick dips in the water out, but it lets water in when your gear goes overboard to release a float attached to your gear by 60 feet of line so you can get it back. Go to SaveYourOutdoors.com to learn more and try some for yourself, and use promo code FNFP15 to save 15% on your order. That's SaveYourOutdoors.com and promo code FNFP15. All right, Robert. Did you have any final thoughts on either of the topics that we tackled tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big rock to me is pretty cut and dry. I'm just glad I'm not in any of those shoes. Either one of the boats, I'm glad I wasn't on either one of them. I'm glad I'm not a big rock official who has to make that call. That's just a bad situation all the way around. I probably did get a little bit off tangent on the paddlers being squeezed out of these major tournaments, but I do think that a lot of people maybe that are, talking about this, I don't think, like I said, the top 20 people are going to kick most people's butts every day, regardless of what equipment or where they put in at. So I think it is important that those people probably have the loudest voices and should be heard the most on it, because I think that's who it matters to the most. And I know we want to keep bringing new people into the sport. And I just think there's a way to do both. I think there's a way to pull people from bass boats. I think there's a way to promote this sport. And I think there's a way to allow the people that are just getting into it to feel like they have a shot at it too. And I think that is by having designated boundaries and not making you go out of designated launches. I like the lines drawn on the map idea a lot better, or a GPS app or something to that effect. And I know people are going to argue that they think there's still gray areas. Well, there's gray areas of going out of a launch too, because you're only supposed to go as far as you can go. But really, how far is that? I mean, if somebody can jump a log and somebody else can't, so there's going to be gray area. It doesn't matter. There's going to be gray area in tournament fishing. So I just think the people that have most time on the water, work the hardest, and have more time to fish, are probably going to be the ones that come out on top most of the time, regardless of the kayak, the gear, live scope, 360, motors, not motors, paddle, where you put in at. I think that time on the water is such a big difference that I think a lot of us get hung up on the other things. And I think to 90 to 95% of kayak anglers, we're focused on the live scope and the where we putting in and this and that and the other, and which motor goes 1 mile an hour faster, and which rod does this dude say that I'm supposed to use, and this guy recommends this kayak or this motor, and what line am I supposed to use? And I think that everybody forgets that you got to go and put your time on the water and figure these things out. And I think a lot of the things we focus on and spend time on could be better spent throwing a lure and figuring it out.
Absolutely.
So I think a lot of the noise and stuff, I think, is about the wrong thing. I think until you've put all that time in and you get your skills to where they need to be, then I don't think the rest of it matters.
Absolutely. I mean, go and spend that time figuring out what your comfort zone is figuring out what works for you, and you'll get there. I mean, I so a lot of people who listen to the podcast know that I am a huge Fluke Master fan. I really, really, really wanted to like the stuff that he likes, and some of the stuff like 13 fishing rods are phenomenal when I'm fishing from the bank, but they're so soft that I never got a good hook set with them fishing like a Texas rig or something like that in the kayak. It just did not work for me. Um, I mean, so it's one of those things that's like, just because such and such uses them and it works for them doesn't mean it's going to work for you. I mean, it works for Drew Gregory. He figured out how to get a good hook set in them from a kayak with the 13 fishing rods, but yeah, I didn't. So it's just figure out what works for you, and let's try to be more proactive and more constructive, rather than, instead of saying, well, he's too good, let's figure out how to handicap him. Let's kind of and it's going to be a pendulum that swings until we find the middle. And right now it's swung too far away from the paddlers, and it will probably next time, I'm assuming that it's going to either it's going to stay where it is and it's never going to go back towards the paddler, or it's going to overcorrect until we find the middle. So um, I don't think we're going to find the middle on the next season. I think it's going to take at least another 5 or 6 years to really find either the true middle and a happy medium, or it's going to be this is an offshore game now. So
Yeah. And it may end up being that your local trails are where the paddlers more end up, and the national trails become more motor driven and bigger kayaks.
which is sad.
Well, I do agree with you, but that may end up being what happens, only because the money that the motors would bring into to help get the dollars where they need to be, so people could really do this full time. Um, and I'm not saying I'm for that. I'm just saying that that's maybe what I see happening is it going down that road of, your paddlers may keep getting squeezed out. It just look at pro bass fishing, and I think they brought it up on the podcast. They're talking about they, went from 150s to 250s. There's no reason to go from 150s to 250s motors, on a bass boat. But that's what they did. So you're telling me if you're fishing out of a boat with a 115 on it, that you're not at quite of at a disadvantage when you take off at a shotgun start or whatever. You can get to spots faster. I mean, unless you're Dustin Connell, I mean, I think he made it fishing out of a 17-foot boat with a 115 on it, but he had more time on the water. See, it goes back to that time on the water. He can beat your butt in it doesn't matter. He could have probably beat him in a kayak, out of, people fishing out of bass boats, because he's got so much more time on the water. So I think it all goes back to that. But I hope it doesn't go that way. I hope that the designated launches go away. I'd rather see it be, to certain points on the map. And that way, some people can slide in on some of these public access ramps or, public access locations. And I do think that that's a cool part of kayak bass fishing, is for somebody to go find some skinny water somewhere and find these bass that hadn't seen a lure. And I just think that's some of the draw to this sport. And I think that's some of the aura around it. And I think that's what makes it more fun, is to find
Absolutely.
these places. And I don't want to see the sport lose that. Even at the top levels, I'd rather see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah.
it's one of, if not the thing that is going to help us share the water with the bass boats. Because I mean,
Yeah.
if we're all out there trying to fish the same offshore brush piles, somebody's going to end up getting hurt.
Yeah, and it's probably going to be a kayaker, because those bass boat boys, I can't tell you the number of times that I know from fishing out of a boat for a long time. Now, there's some rude people there's some rude boaters that will be rude to other boaters, but I see that way more fishing out of a kayak. I have people cut right in front of me and just start fishing, and they can see that I'm fishing down a bank line. I mean, I got a trolling motor on the front of the kayak. I'm fishing. It's the same as somebody else standing on a boat trolling down there, but they'll come cut right in front of you on a kayak and not think anything about it. So that is a good point to, make that body of water that much bigger for more people to fish on when you get some of those kayaks up in the skinny water. And that's the one thing that is always going to limit this sport as well, is they're not making any new lakes.
Mm-hmm.
There's only a certain amount of square footage that we have to work with. So anytime we can expand that and get to some of this skinny water, I think it's mo better.
Faux show. All right, man. Well, you want to close this out in prayer tonight, man?
Yeah, I'll close this out. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for giving us opportunity to talk about fishing and kayaks and a little bit of life. And hopefully during some of this, we've brought somebody closer to you. And please watch over everybody fishing. Let them get back home safely. And let our actions and our words bring people closer to you. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right, man. You want to... It's been a while since you've been on the podcast. Man. I'll let you sign us out.
You got me laughing. I'm going to start coughing now. All right, you guys. Hey, thanks for joining us. Come back next week and see what Cam has to talk about next week.
Thank you for listening to the Faith and Fishing podcast. Faith and Fishing is produced and hosted by Cam Steele and Robert Randolph, and is sponsored by Savior Outdoors, Jay's Jigs, Get Outdoors Pedal and Paddle, Mr. B Lure Company, Atollas, and Omnia Fishing. Don't forget to join the Facebook community, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe, rate, and review us on whatever app you're listening on. That's going to do it for this episode. Y'all take care, and God bless.